Hey crew, it's Bit, and I'm back on another Bible study. Today we will be wrapping up Leviticus. We're going to be diving back into Leviticus 24, but before we do that, let me go ahead and say that if you are happy where you are in your religion, this is not the Bible study for you. If you are easily offended by people not taking the Bible literally, then you should probably not be here. I have a different take on things. I do things a little bit differently over here, and I would hate for you to get your feelings hurt. That being said, we are going to dive back into Leviticus 24 because we left off at Leviticus 23. We will be finishing up today. The oil for the lamps. I'm going to go through this rather quickly. There are definitely things that we need to talk about in here today, so we're going to go through it as quickly as possible. And then the Lord said to Moses, "Command the Israelites to bring you the pure oil of pressed olives for the light, to keep the lamps burning continually. Outside the veil of the testimony, in the tent of meeting, Aaron is to tend the lamps continually before the Lord, from evening until morning. This is to be a permanent statute for generations to come. He shall tend the lamps on the pure gold lampstand before the Lord continually. You are also to take fine flour and bake 12 loaves, using 2/10 of an ephah for each loaf, and set them in 2 rows, 6 per row, on the table of pure gold before the Lord. And you are to place pure frankincense near each row, so that it may serve as a memorial proportion for the bread, an offering made by fire to the Lord. Every Sabbath day the bread is to be set out before the Lord on behalf of the Israelites as a permanent covenant. It belongs to Aaron and his sons, who are to eat it in a holy place, for it is to him a most holy part of the offerings made by fire to the Lord, his portion forever." Now, the son of an Israelite mother and an Egyptian father went out among the Israelites. So, here we learn an important thing that we have not had confirmed before, that there were Egyptians that left with the Israelites. It makes sense because they lived there for a very long time. There was absolutely going to be some commingling, right? But here we have a confirmation of that is exactly what happened. I've given my theory on what happened that night, and you can take it or leave it. There is still division, however, between the Egyptians and the Israelites. Otherwise, they left as a nation, right? They left as a people. They are called to go and follow God, and yet there is still a division between the Israelite mother with an Egyptian father having a kid. So the kid is differentiated from the rest. And a fight broke out in the camp between him and an Israelite. The son of an Israelite woman blasphemed the name with a curse. So they brought him to Moses. His mother's name was Shelomith, daughter of Dibri, of the tribe of Dan. They placed him in custody until the will of the Lord should be made clear to them. And then the Lord said to Moses, "Take the blasphemer outside the camp, and have all who heard him lay their hands on his head, and then have the whole assembly stone him. And you are to tell the Israelites, if anyone curses his God, he shall bear the consequences of his sin. Whoever blasphemes the name of the Lord must surely be put to death. The whole assembly must surely stone him, whether he is a foreign resident or native, and if he blasphemes the name, he must be put to death." Okay, so let's talk about this real quick. We have a kid. I sat on that for a second for a reason, because this is not a man. He is not in the age of majority. If he was, then they would have said a descendant of Egypt, a man with an Egyptian father, but it's not. It's a kid. And a fight broke out between 2 children, and one of the kids said something, and therefore this child must be brought out, and everybody must gather around him and put their hands on his head and then throw rocks at him until he dies. That's what God says. That's what God is telling you. Shed no blood of man. But if this guy says the wrong word, hit him in the head with rocks until he bleeds out. Total sense. Absolutely makes sense. Totally. Absolutely. There's absolutely forgiveness and teaching and direction. And hit him in the head until the brains fall out. That is absolutely a good alternative for God to put out. Like God says, oh, you kill somebody, there might be a little bit of leeway there. But if you say this word, kill that dude. An eye for an eye. Here's another one of those, right? And if a man takes the life of anyone else, he must surely be put to death. Whoever kills an animal must make restitution, life for life. If anyone injures his neighbor, whatever he has done must be done to him. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Just as he injured the other person, the same must be inflicted on him. So, if we get into an altercation and you attack me, and I break you, I must be broken. Nah, fam, pass me with that. For real. Like, a lot of the problem I have is the fact that I can't conceive of God giving the ground away. God created every single person, thing, and non-thing on the entirety of our globe. He wants all things to willingly come to his service. But he's going to put an end to somebody who says a bad word. Now, if someone murders someone, then the justice should be served. But if there's an accidental problem, there should not be a permanent repercussion, right? Like genuinely accidental, right? You can't just say, oh, it was an accident and everybody saw you intentionally plow into somebody. Right? But if there's a medical problem, like you're driving a car and you have a seizure, you never had a seizure before in your life. You had no clue that this could happen to you. You have a seizure, you accidentally hit somebody. That's manslaughter. But there's a justification behind it because you had this problem and it was an accident. There is no allowing for an accident in this book, right? At least where we are so far. Now, Numbers and Deuteronomy do a lot of retelling with a slightly different twist on some of these things. And so there's a little bit more explanation in those books for some things, and there's more explanation in this book than there is in those for some things. Which doesn't make sense. If this is the divinely ordained book of God with the instructions on how to live, it should be pretty goddamn clear. And if that offended you, you're in the wrong Bible study. Because God does damn incorrect teachings. Take from that how you will. Whoever kills an animal must make restitution, but whoever kills a man must be put to death. You are to have the same standard of law for a foreign resident and the native, for I am the Lord your God. And then Moses spoke to the Israelites. They took the blasphemer outside the camp and stoned him. So the Israelites did as the Lord had commanded Moses. So they took this kid, like this is still a continuation of that, right? This is the explanation for why they took the kid out and stoned him. And even though he is half an outsider, you still must put justice upon him. That's what is being said here. It's keeping a clear line of division between the Israelites and the Egyptians. That's not a full Israelite, right? Maybe it's only 3/5 of one. And then the Lord said to Moses on Mount Sinai, speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land I am giving you, that's another thing, keep in mind as we go through. Every time he makes the promise, I am giving you this land. The land itself must observe a Sabbath to the Lord. For 6 years you may sow your field and prune your vineyard and gather its crops. But in the 7th year there shall be a Sabbath of complete rest for the land. A Sabbath to the Lord. We've talked about why the Sabbath is an important thing. You are not to sow your field or prune your vineyard. You are not to reap the aftergrowth of your harvest or gather your grapes for your untended vines. The land must have a year of complete rest. Whatever the land yields during the 7th year shall be food for you, for yourself, for your manservants and maidservants, your hired hands, or foreigner who stays with you, for your livestock and the wild animals in your land. All its growth may serve as food, but you don't get to tend the crops, only what comes up wild. The year of Jubilee. Hold on, we're going to get into this one. And you shall count all 7 Sabbaths of years, 7 times 7 years, so 49, so that the 7 Sabbaths of years amount to 49 years. Then you are to sound the horn far and wide on the 10th day of the 7th month, the Day of Atonement. You shall sound it throughout your land. You are to consecrate the 50th year to proclaim liberty in the land for all its inhabitants. It shall be your Jubilee, when each of you is to return his property to his clan. Let's pop this out. And we're going to look at a particular word here, and that word is Jubilee. For my entire life, I thought that Jubilee was a celebration. For my entire life, I thought that this word meant a celebration. And it doesn't. It means a horn. This is the year of the horn. This is the horn. The literal. This entire year, you're supposed to remember the sound of the horn. They blow this horn throughout the year so that you remember the sound of the horn, because one day we're going to hear that sound. Right? It is remarkably similar to a ram's horn. But the Jubilee is not a celebration. It's the year after the Sabbath rest, and it's a whole year of rest on top of a year of rest. So you'll have the Sabbath, right? The 49th year is the seventh, so you have a whole year of Sabbath for the land. And then the next day you have a whole one again, every 50 years. You are to consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty in the land for its inhabitants. It shall be your Jubilee. It's the year of the horns. It is the year to remember that the day will come. Return of the property. In this year of Jubilee, each of you shall return to his own property. Now here begins a very interesting thing. Property rights in Israel, which they do not even possess at this point, right? This is before they take possession of the land. They're still dealing with Moses. Moses doesn't get to go into Israel. But he's laying out to them that property rights are a really strange thing. Because you can sell your property, but then somebody has to give it back to you. The person that you sold it to has to give it back. So if you sell your land in the year of the Jubilee, or the year after the Jubilee, you'll start fresh, year one after Jubilee, then you sell that land for a term of 49 years. And on the 50th year, it returns to you. So you set your property according to the value there. And they're going to explain this in just a second, but it's a very interesting thing to make sure you understand that the property comes back in the year of the horn. The dominion over the land reverts in the year of the horn. Remember that when we get into prophecy later. If you make a sale to your neighbor or a purchase from him, you must not take advantage of each other. This is telling you not to use usury on it gets in more in detail about interest and when you can and can't charge interest later. But you're not supposed to take advantage of your neighbors. If you know your neighbor is in a tight spot, you're supposed to help him out. And that's the whole point of this property situation, is so that my neighbor's having trouble making their bills. Well, I'm going to take possession of their land and pay the bills for them, and then they get a chance to make restitution. That's outlined in here as well. But you're supposed to help out your neighbors at no or low cost. You are to buy from your neighbor according to the number of years since the last Jubilee. He is to sell to you and according to the numbers of harvest years remaining. You shall increase the price in proportion to the greater number of years, or decrease it in proportion to the lesser number of years. For he is selling you a given number of harvests. Do not take advantage of each other, but fear your God. For I am the Lord your God. It's not water today. This is juice. Okay, so you are to keep my statutes and carefully observe my judgments, so that you may dwell securely in the land. And then the land will yield its fruit, so that you can eat your fill and dwell in the safety of the land. Now you may wonder, what will we eat in the 7th year if we do not sow or gather our produce? But I will send my blessing upon you in the 6th year, so that the land will yield a crop sufficient for 3 years. And while you are sowing in the 8th year, you will be eating from the previous harvest, until the 9th year's harvest comes in. The law of redemption. The land must not be sold permanently, because it is mine, and you are but foreigners and residents with me. But he gave them the land. But it's his land. And you're only there by my leeway, right? Now, you can absolutely make the argument for the dominion of God and that all the land is his. I'm not going to argue with that. I believe that. But he does give us dominion over it, right? He has told us to go forth and subjugate, to be fruitful and multiply and subjugate all the parts of the earth. And so we, as people, have decided that these individual chunks of it belong to individual people for a period at least. And so that is a whole different concept from what is being put out here. Right? Here it is, you are just a steward of this land for me. And the way we live is we have ownership of this land as stewards. It's kind of a different thing. If your brother becomes impoverished and sells some of his property, his nearest kin may come and redeem what his brother has sold. So, if my brother has 40 acres and he falls on hard times and he sells 13 acres, I have the right to go and buy that 13 acres, whether or not the buyer wants to sell them. And then at the end of the term period, it goes back to the guy who I bought it from. All you're really doing is renting the property for a set amount. If a man has no one to redeem it for him, but he prospers and acquires enough to redeem his land, he shall calculate the years since its sale, and repay the balance to the man to whom he sold it, and return to his property. But if he cannot obtain enough to repay him, what he sold will remain in possession of the buyer until the year of the Jubilee. In the Jubilee, however, it is to be released so that he may return to his property. That to me is a mismanagement. Because if you're falling into the times where you are not taking care of your land, then you probably shouldn't have the care of the land. It probably should not be your land. It should probably go to the person who is actually going to take care of it. All right. So that he may return to his property. And if a man sells a house in a walled city, he remains his right of redemption until a full year after its sale. And during that year, it may be redeemed. If it is not redeemed by the end of a full year, then the house in the walled city is permanently transferred to its buyer and his descendants. It is not to be released in the Jubilee. Hold on now. So we have two different laws. One for the people who live in the city and don't really have to work the land, and one for the people who work the land. Okay, that's absolutely fair. There's absolutely justification in that. But in houses and villages with no walls around them are to be considered as open fields. They may be redeemed, and they shall be released in the Jubilee. As for the city of the Levites always have the right to redeem their houses in the cities they possess. Wait, you're telling me the ruling class doesn't get affected by the regular laws? So if they have a house in the city and they sell their house in the walled city, it's not the other person's after a year because they're the special ones. They're part of this special order. They're the people who this whole book is dedicated to. Alright? So whatever belongs to the Levites may be redeemed, a house sold in a city they possess, and must be released in the Jubilee, because the houses in the cities of the Levites are their possessions among the Israelites. But the open pasture land around their cities may not be sold. This is their permanent possession. If you can't see the laying out of the ruling class here, I don't even know what to tell you. Now, again, I don't necessarily think that it was a bad thing that they did it, because it was bringing up a new level of understanding. And from that level of understanding, we could achieve greater understanding. But if we retained the old level of understanding, we would all still be doing some pretty terrible things. So I don't necessarily disagree that it happened and that it needed to happen. I don't particularly like the way that it was implemented, but it was the best that they could do. We do not, by any means, need to be living in the same manner. Redemption for the poor. Now, if your countryman becomes destitute and cannot support himself among you, then you are to help him as you would a foreigner or stranger, so that he can continue to live among you. Do not take any interest or profit from him, but fear your God, that your countryman may live among you. You must not lend him your silver at interest, or sell him your food for profit. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan to be your God. Oh, it's interesting to note that at this point in history, gold is used as ornamentation, but not really the currency. Almost every single time that you see a reference to currency, it is silver. Even though we hold the gold standard as the high, and gold was less abundant in those days. It was a scarcer resource. It would make sense that gold would be the way to go. But it's silver. And that's just a little interesting something that may or may not be of value outside of this particular book. If you know some of the other stories surrounding gold, then it might make a little more sense why gold never really became a thing for a while. Because the Israelites are my servants, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt, they are not to be sold as slaves. You are not to rule over them harshly, but you shall fear your God. So these people were delivered from slavery, and we're about to get into the rules for slaves. Your menservant and maidservants shall come from the nations around you, from whom you may purchase them. You may also purchase them from foreigners residing among you, or their clans living among you, who are born in your land. These may become your property. You may leave them to your sons after you inherit as property. You can make them slaves for life. But as for your brothers, the Israelites, no man may rule harshly over his brother. Here is another big problem for me. Here is another, I can't get down with this, because no man is property of another man. That I firmly believe. Now, I'm not saying that if I lived in past times that I would hold the views that I do now, because I probably wouldn't. But I would really like to hope I would. Right? I would really like to hope that God would open my eyes to the fact that no person is a piece of property to another. I understand fully that at the time, slavery was a big thing, right? But these were people that God had delivered from slavery. And within a year or so, because the timing in Leviticus is a little bit, who knows, but generally speaking, it's before they enter into the land, right? They're not even wandering the desert yet. And so, like, they're in the desert, but it's not wander the desert because of your iniquities, right? We're still at the point of, I'm leading you through the desert to the promised land. We haven't got to the broken promises of wandering the desert yet. And it seems like if God himself was setting down a way forward for these ex-slaves, it would not include more slavery. Right? Like, the God who created all things and sustains all life doesn't want people to be property of other people. You're supposed to love your neighbor as yourself. And who's your neighbor? Everybody. And so you can't love somebody you own. It's not even possible to love somebody that you own. It's not. You might think that, but it's not true. If you own somebody, if you are controlling over somebody, you don't love them. If you're trying to dictate somebody's every move, you don't love them. If you're trying to move their conversations in certain directions because it pleases you, you don't really love them. You should be able to deal with them as they are and love them. You should be able to allow them the autonomy of their own life and love them. But you cannot own somebody and love them. And you cannot let somebody be owned and claim to be a loving God. That is not a possibility. And God does punish those who speak wrongly. I know that. Redemption of servants. If a foreigner residing among you prospers, but your countryman dwelling near him becomes destitute and sells himself to the foreigner or to a member of his clan, he retains the right of redemption after he sold himself. One of his brothers may redeem him, either his uncle or cousins or any close relative from his clan may redeem him, or if he prospers, he may redeem himself. He and his purchaser will then count the time from the year he sold himself up to the year of Jubilee. The price of his sale will be determined by the number of years, based on the daily wages of a hired hand. If many years remain, he must pay for his redemption in proportion to his purchase price. If only a few years remain until the year of Jubilee, he is to calculate and pay his redemption according to his remaining years. He shall be treated like a man hired from year to year, but if a foreign owner must not rule over him harshly in your sight. So you can own these people, but you don't get to beat them. And it's okay if somebody, has sexual relations with that, right? We did that earlier. If you're a slave and some stranger comes up and has sex with you, that's perfectly fine. No problems. Even if he is not redeemed in any of these ways, he and his children shall be released in the year of Jubilee. For the Israelites are my servants. They are my servants, who I brought out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Not me. All right, Leviticus 26. Additional blessings of obedience. You must not make idols for yourselves, or set up a carved image or sacred pillar. You must not place a sculpted stone in your land to bow down to it. But if you make an altar out of gold, it's okay. It's okay. But not like you can't sculpt anything out of stone. You can't put a tool on anything. But if you make it out of gold, that's perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. I know it seems like a contradiction to say that if you bow down before this thing made by man, it's a blasphemy, and then require me to bow down before this thing made by man. I know that seems like a contradiction, but there's no way it could possibly be a contradiction in one book of the Bible. Okay. You must keep my Sabbaths and have reverence for my sanctuary. I am the Lord. If you follow my statutes and carefully keep my commandments, I will give you rains in their season, and the land will yield its produce, and the trees of the field will bear their fruit. Your threshing will continue until the grape harvest, and the grape harvest will continue until sowing time. You will have your fill of food to eat and dwell securely in your land. And I will give peace to the land, and you will lie down with nothing to fear. I will rid the land of dangerous animals, and no sword shall pass through your land. You will pursue your enemies, and they will fall by the sword before you. 5 of you will pursue 100, and 100 of you will pursue 10,000. And your enemies will fall by the sword before you. I will turn toward you and make you fruitful and multiply you. I will establish my covenant with you. Another one? You will still be eating the old supply of grain when you need to clear it out to make room for the new. And I will make my dwelling place among you, and my soul will not despise you. I will walk among you and be your God. You will be my people. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, so that you would no longer be slaves to the Egyptians. I broke the bars of your yoke and enabled you to walk in uprightness. If, however, you fail to obey me and carry out these commandments, if you reject my statutes, despise my ordinances, and neglect to carry out all my commandments, and so break my covenant, then this is what I will do to you. I will bring upon you sudden terror, wasting disease, and a fever that will destroy your sight and drain your life. You will sow your seed in vain, because your enemies will eat it, and I will set my face against you, so that you are defeated by your enemies. Those who hate you will rule over you, and you will flee when no one pursues you. And if, after all of this, you will not obey me, I will proceed to punish you sevenfold for your sins. I will break down your stubborn pride, and make your sky like iron, and your land like bronze. And your strength will be spent in vain. For your land will not yield its produce, and the trees of the land will not bear their fruit. There is things going on today. It started this past week. It spurred me to get back into Leviticus. There is a peoples in the area who feel very oppressed and have taken an aggressive stance from that. I'm not there. I can't speak with certainty on any topic. So, if you're not actually witnessing things and all you have is secondhand reports, then you're not really speaking with accuracy. Now, you can try with the reports that we have to make some sense out of what is going on. The peoples in the Strip feel oppressed. Whether or not they are is not my decision to make. Their actions have an awful lot to do with their current situation. And knowing the history that we know, which may or may not be correct, the Israeli people seem to be very justified in their protective measures and their retaliatory effects. The people who are there have sworn to eradicate. Now, I believe we are coming up on the 47th year, but I might be wrong. I want to say last year was 46 and this year is 47, but I might be wrong, but we're getting really close to 50. And in the 50th year, there's a restitution of the land, and we'll see how that goes. There was Shemitahs, right? We've all heard the Shemitah spiel from that one guy with the really freaky looking face. Like, that guy's got some weird eyes, man. Something ain't right with that dude. And it seems like we are coming back upon another one of those parts of the cycle. And it might be the return of the land part of the cycle. And the part that brings me into that is because we were looking at this, right? If you reject my statutes, now these people have made this covenant with this entity. Whether or not this is the God or if this is Baal or whoever it is, they have entered into a covenant as a people with this entity. And they have said that as a people, they would abide by certain things. Well, I don't know how up you are on Israel, but I can pretty firmly say that they are not living in accordance with the covenant. Now, whether or not that has anything to do with this sudden terror, right? And sowing your seeds in vain in farms and communal areas because the enemies will eat it. I don't know if that's part of it. And setting my face against you so that you will be defeated by enemies. I don't know about that either. And those who hate you will rule over you. And you will flee when no one pursues you. Maybe we're there. Because whether or not it is the correct entity, the conditions still apply. Whether or not you are dealing with God or an angel or a demon, the covenants that you make, you will be held to. And so if you are making a covenant that you will follow all of these commandments to a T, including the stoning of children, and you're not doing that, you got a problem. And that problem might be that you need an iron sky. Right? Where are we at? Right here. After all of this, you will not obey me. I will punish you sevenfold. I will break your stubborn pride and make your sky like iron and your land like bronze. Well, that's weird, right? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Let's bust that out and look at that, because a sky like iron, what could make a sky like iron? Iron is gray, but I mean, the sky gets gray all the time. And there weren't rockets back then. But if you fire off enough rockets, it looks like there's welds going across the sky. Or maybe you have an iron dome. Maybe you have a missile defense system that's an iron sky, because you're not living how you're supposed to be, and you have stubborn pride. Land like bronze. Bronze is like a yellow, but there's no life in it, right? Maybe that's what it is. But then again, bronze is a little bit warm. It gives a warm feeling when you look at bronze. It's kind of sunny and cheery, so it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. I will make your sky like iron. Let's see what that says. From the same as Birzuth, iron, axe head, chains. I will make your sky like chains. Well, that might be rocket fire. The sky keeping you in chains because you don't know where the rock is going to land is one way, right? You're held in fear of getting blown up. That's one way that it could be like that. And then the rocket trails could absolutely look like chains. So you're being, the head of an axe. Your sky will look like the head of an axe, the implement of war coming in. That could absolutely be missiles. Is it? I don't know. I don't have God's direct voice on that. I just read what I see, right? Well, what's the bronze? Let's see what that is. Like copper or bronze, hardened with alloy, material of a bow. Well, that's interesting. An obstinate brow, an unproductive earth. So your ground will not give forth fruit, is what's meant to be said there. Bronze is rotted wood, a bow of bronze, the doors of bronze. So it's definitely dealing with the metal, but it is also dealing with obstinate brow. So that's not doing what you're supposed to do, like setting your face against God. Figurative of strength, a material of a bow, and an unproductive earth. Specifically in Leviticus 26:19. That's where we're at, right? Yeah. So it's definitely talking about an unproductive earth. And your strength will be spent in vain. Well, they're about to spend some strength, and we will see if it's in vain. For your land will not yield its produce, and the trees of the land will not bear fruit. If you walk in hostility towards me and refuse to obey me, I will multiply your plagues 7 times according to your sins. I will send wild animals against you to rob you of your children, destroy your livestock, and reduce your numbers until your roads lie desolate. Now that's an interesting turn of phrase, especially considering what's going on. I don't know how much attention you pay to the news, but the Prime Minister of Israel in recent remarks talked about people acting like wild animals. Now, I'm not making that comparison, but he did. And there's video of children in containers. I don't want to say the other word because, that sure looks like a whole lot of rob you of your children going on right now. Destroying your livestock, reducing your numbers until your roads lie desolate. So the farms, the kibbutz, the children have been taken, reducing the numbers. How many people died this past weekend? And your roads lie desolate. I saw a video this morning of Israel today on the 11th, and there's almost nobody on the roads in Jerusalem. In spite of these things, you did not accept my discipline, but continue to walk in hostility toward me, then I will act with hostility toward you. I will strike you 7-fold for your sins, and I will bring a sword against you to execute the vengeance of the covenant. Though you withdraw into your cities, I will send a plague among you, and you will be delivered into the hand of the enemy. When I cut off your supply of bread, 10 women will bake your bread in a single oven, and dole out your bread by weight, so that you will eat, but not be satisfied. This is an echo of Revelation. This is telling Israel here the same thing that is iterated in Revelation, when a woman will beg a man to marry her. Right? This is the same thing going on right here. You'll have 10 women baking you bread. Women will beg men to marry them, to protect them from the things that are happening in the world. We are on the doorstep of things way down the line, and this is in Leviticus. Just because I don't agree with the entity and the things aligned with it does not mean I do not give power to the fact that prophecies serve purposes. They are there for us to know about the bottlenecks and the situations that will happen around them. And we will see many times these same things being told of farther down the road. it can definitely be argued that the current state of Israel is walking in hostility towards the entity they signed covenant with. If you don't know what goes on in Israel, they are not necessarily living by the Old Testament. But in spite of all of this, if in spite of all of this you do not obey me, but continue to walk in hostility towards me, then I will walk in fury against you, and I, even I, will punish you sevenfold for your sins. You will eat the flesh of your own sons and daughters. I will destroy your high places, cut down your incense altars, and heap your lifeless bodies on the lifeless remains of your idols, and my soul will despise you. I will reduce your cities to rubble and lay waste to your sanctuaries. I will refuse to smell the pleasing aroma of your sacrifices. And I will lay waste to the land so that your enemies who dwell in it will be appalled. I will scatter you among the nations, and I will draw out a sword after you, as your land becomes desolate and your cities are laid waste. Again, a echo like when we see the armies that surround Jerusalem, and the abomination that causes desolation is there for all to see. This is the echo of that, right? This is the foundation of that further prophecy, because prophecy is the fulfillment of things you know, right? That give you that in the context of what you can understand. That's why when Ezekiel saw the wheels, he didn't understand what was going on. He just described it as best that he could. He didn't know what those things were, those chariots that he saw. He didn't know what that was. He had never seen anything like it. But he described it as best he can. You keep these things in the realm of what you understand. When they see these things in the future, they're describing as to what they can understand. What is prophesied to happen is that there will be armies that will surround Jerusalem, and they will continue past Jerusalem down into Saudi Arabia, all the way to the Islamic holy place with the rock they all kiss. You know, that rock they worship, that black stone, the Merkaba, I think? No. Whatever it is, I can't remember. It's slipping my mind. That happens. But whatever it is, but the armies are going to come. They're going to cross the Euphrates, right? Because it's dried up. They're going to come across the Euphrates, come down, surround Jerusalem, complete the devastation there, and then move on to the other holy places of Islam, because that has to be accomplished before they come back out and the Antichrist and all of that. So if you don't know Islamic prophecy, you should. That's part of the same thing. And as long as it lies desolate, the land will not have the rest it did not receive during the Sabbaths that you lived in it. Then the land shall enjoy its Sabbaths all the days that lies desolate, while you are in the lands of your enemies. And at that time it will rest and enjoy its Sabbaths. As long as it lies desolate, the land will have the rest it did not receive. Now, before Israel took current possession, the land was desolate. There can be an argument, absolutely, that this part has been fulfilled. That the diaspora, when the Jews were scattered among the nations and had no homeland, was this part. As for those of you who survive, I will send a faintness into their hearts in the land of their enemies, so that even the sound of a wind-blown leaf will put them to flight. And they will flee as one flees the sword, and fall when no one pursues them. They will stumble over one another as before the sword, though no one is behind them. So you will not be able to stand against your enemies. You will perish among the nations, and the land of your enemies will consume you. Those of you who survive in the lands of your enemies will waste away in their iniquity, and will decay in the sins of their fathers. That is the argument against this being fulfilled then. Because they didn't waste away. They have a homeland now. A nation was born overnight. God remembers those who repent. But if they will confess their iniquity and that of their fathers in the unfaithfulness that they practiced against me, by which they have also walked in hostility towards me, and I acted with hostility towards them, and brought them into the land of their enemies. And if their uncircumcised hearts will be humbled, and they will make amends for their iniquity, then I will remember my covenant with Jacob, and my covenant with Isaac, and my covenant with Abram, and the covenant that he's about to form with this other people, and the covenant that he formed with Moses, and the covenant that's formed with Aaron. There's a lot of covenants. There's a whole lot of needing new promises. For the land will be abandoned by them, and it will enjoy its Sabbath by lying desolate without them. And they will pay the penalty for their iniquity, because they had rejected my ordinances, and abhorred my statutes. Yet, in spite of this, when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not reject or despise them, so as to destroy them, and break my covenant with them. Well, you just said you would. For I am the Lord their God, but for their sake I will remember the covenant with their fathers, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt in the sight of the nations, that I might be their Lord, their God. I am the Lord. These are the statutes, ordinances, and laws that the Lord establishes between himself and the Israelites through Moses on Mount Sinai. All right, almost there, guys, almost there. The rules about valuations. And then the Lord said to Moses, speak to the Israelites and say to them, when someone makes a special vow to the Lord involving the value of a person, if the valuation concerns a male from 20 to 60 years of age, then your valuation shall be 50 shekels of silver, according to the sanctuary shekel. Or, if it is a female, then your valuation will be 30 shekels. So 3/5. And if the person is from 5 to 20 years of age, then your valuation for the male shall be 20 shekels, and for the female, 10. So if you're selling someone under the age of 20, they're only worth 20 shekels. But if you sell somebody that's over the age of 20, but less than the age of 60, then they're worth 50 shekels. It's nice to know that God himself set the valuation of a man. God himself said, this is how much your life is worth. God said that. Now, if the person is from 1 month to 5 years of age, then your valuation for the male shall be 5 shekels of silver, and for the female, 3 shekels of silver. Again, 3/5. And if the person is 60 years of age or older, then your valuation shall be 15 shekels for the male, and 10 for the female. But if the one making the vow is too poor to pay the valuation, he is to present the person before the priest, who shall set the value according to what the one making the vow can afford. If he vows that an animal may be brought as an offering to the Lord, any such animal given to the Lord shall be holy, but he must not replace it or exchange it, either good for bad or bad for good. If he does substitute one animal for another, both that animal and its substitute will be holy. So if you have livestock and one of them is born, it was a practice to say, this animal is going to be for God. This is my sacrificial animal. And so you would give that to the priests. They would do the raising of it, and that would be theirs, right? And so this is saying that if you did that and then you found out that, man, that is a really good animal, I want to keep that one. Let's trade it out for this other one that's still okay, but not the best. Then they get both of them, because you had already declared that this one. Or if it's much worse, then both of them. You're not allowed to exchange good for bad or bad for good. So either way, if you try to swap it out, you lose 2 animals instead of 1. That's because people would take it and they'd be like, no, I meant this one over here, and it's the sickly one. So they gave that one to God. That's why there are restrictions on which animals to do, because if you left it up to man to choose out which one to give, he's going to give the worst one of the flock every time. This one I'm going to get rid of anyway. That one can go to God. That's why they have that part in it. If a man and they also have the practice of consecrating to the Lord, right? So declaring that for this amount of time, this particular thing belongs to the God. That part of that is the redemption of the Jubilees, and the taxes and the tithe is the reason why. If you can't afford, say you have 50 acres, and you can't afford for the tithe that is required for that 50 acres, then you would consecrate to the priesthood an acre or two to cover your tithe. And then they would get the entirety of that field that would belong to them. That's what the consecration of it is. Just so going forward, we know. All right. Now, if a man consecrates his house as holy to the Lord, then the priest shall value it as either good or bad. The price will stand just as the priest values it. But if he who consecrates his house redeems it, he must add a fifth to the assessed value, and it will belong to him. So, if you can't pay your debt and you pawn out your house to the church, you can redeem it if you pay 20%. Oh, that sounds a lot worse. My bad. I mean, that's what it is. You're pawning your home or your field or your spouse or your children. That's what's about to happen. If a man consecrates to the Lord a parcel of his land, then your valuation shall be proportional to the seed required for it. 50 shekels of silver for every homer of barley seed. So, the homer is about an acre's worth. The value of a man is less than an acre of seed. Oh, is that a problem? My bad. If he consecrates his field during the year of Jubilee, the price will stand according to your valuation. But if he consecrates his field after the Jubilee, the priest is to calculate the price in proportion to the years left until the next year of Jubilee, so that the valuation will be reduced. And if the one who consecrated the field decides to redeem it, he must add 20% to the assessed value, and it shall belong to him. If, however, he does not redeem the field, or if he has sold it to another man, it may no longer be redeemed. And when the field is released in the Jubilee, it will become holy, like a field devoted to the Lord, and it becomes the property of the priest. And again, we wind up with, this is reverting back to the priesthood. Now, if a man consecrates to the Lord a field he has purchased, and which is not part of his own property, and then the priest shall calculate for him the value up to the year of Jubilee, and the man shall pay the assessed value on that day as a sacred offering to the Lord. And in the year of Jubilee, the field shall return to the one from whom it was bought, the original owner of the land. Every valuation will be according to the sanctuary shekel, 20 gerahs to the shekel. But no one may consecrate a firstborn of the livestock, because the firstborn already belongs to the Lord. Whether it is an ox or a sheep, it is the Lord's. But if it is among the unclean animals, then he may redeem it according to your valuation, and add a fifth of its value. If it is not redeemed, then it shall be sold according to your valuation. Nothing that a man sets apart to the Lord from all that he owns, whether a man, an animal, or his inherited land, can be sold or redeemed. Everything so devoted to the Lord, devoted is most holy to the Lord. No person set apart for destruction may be ransomed. He must surely be put to death. Thus, any tithe from the land, whether from the seed of the land or the fruit of the trees, belongs to the Lord. It is holy to the Lord. And if a man wishes to redeem part of his tithe, he must add a fifth to its value. Every 10th animal from the herd or flock that passes under the shepherd's rod will be holy to the Lord. He must not inspect it, whether it is good or bad. He shall not make any substitution. But if he does, both the animal and its substitute shall become holy. They cannot be redeemed. These are the commandments that the Lord gave to Moses for the Israelites on Mount Sinai. And that is going to let us finish up Leviticus. This book is for the establishment of the Levitical order. It is raising up a people from the chaos on the outside, so it is not all bad, but it is absolutely setting the stage for the current situation. This is absolutely the establishment of the deep state. This is one record of the establishment. There are many facets. No one nation or people or tribe or tongue are they. They are not, like, no one people are responsible for all of the things. That is never to be something that is construed from my words. I do not blame people as a whole. Now, individual people within that whole can absolutely be held responsible. And in this particular case, it is the Levitical order, because the Levitical order is establishing dominance. That's why this is the second book. That's why it is laid out in the detail that it is, with the consequences that it has, is so that you don't question the authority of the church. The narcissism that is layered into the various laws, if you question this thing, you are automatically bad. That is a narcissistic response. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up because we've talked for a long time, and hopefully I haven't brought too much confusion to a complicated topic. I want to bring enlightenment and show not everything is correct. It doesn't matter if you believe it. It doesn't matter what I believe. Objectively, things contradict themselves. That is what we have shown so far. Objectively, a just and pure God does not give you a valuation for a slave. Period. And that's where we're going to wrap it up. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Take. Peace.